Good afternoon. Wow. Let's wake up for a second. Good afternoon. All right, welcome. I'm Doug Price. I'm a sixth grade teacher at a charter school in Durham, Voyager Academy Middle School. And I'm just going to go down the line here, and I'd like for you guys to introduce yourselves, and then we'll introduce our topic real quick.
Good afternoon. My name is Bennett Jones. I'm the principal at Clayton High School in Clayton, North Carolina.
Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Johnson, and I'm the principal of Innovation Academy at South Campus in Johnston County, Smithfield.
Good afternoon. I'm Dana Jernigan. I am the principal of Benson Middle School, also in Johnston County.
Hi, y'all. I'm Greg Meyer. I'm a state representative from Orange County.
So our discussion today is going to be around the resource of time and flexibility of time in the classroom. And for all my classroom colleagues that are out there right now, just by show of hands, how many of you would say that you feel like your time is flexible at your school? Take a good note of how many hands are up. Okay. We were out back while we were with the last session going on, and we were just having a discussion about the things that are going on at our schools. And one of the things that I'm most fascinated with by time is that my school has had an opportunity, because we are a charter school, to use flexibility to not only the advantage of the teachers, but more so the advantage of the students for student impact and student success. And one of the things about that is that we get to start our school year before the traditional schools do start, and we are not a year-round school. We start the first full week of August, which means that by the end of the year, we are done the Friday before Memorial Day. Now, for those of you that are teachers in here, you're probably sitting here thinking about what is going on in May that is so impactful to your time in every May, and every teacher said? Testing, right? So we've got EOGs and EOCs that are happening during that time. And the great thing about the school that I get to be a part of is that the last day of EOG testing and EOC testing for our high schoolers is also our last day of school, where we do not have Memorial Day that happens, and then we come back for another week to a week and a half where we're sitting here and testing is already done. So what are we doing in the classroom, right? And the interesting discussion that has come out of that is that we have all kind of talked about what our schools are doing that are unique in capturing that time and that flexibility that is both advantageous for both students and also for teachers. The other thing that came up out of that discussion was the fact that at our school we have the flexibility of time where that every Monday is an early release Monday for our students, so that teachers can have 2.5 hours dedicated every Monday for professional development, where they are meeting with their colleagues, they're meeting with consultants and other members that are coming in, and our leadership has developed a professional development plan for the entire year for the K-12 staff. And so I'm going to kind of turn this over so that each of you can also talk about what your schools are doing and kind of reaching that aspect of time and flexibility.
Thank you, Doug. It's an interesting, and if I've probably given this talk about our journey at South Johnston High School, where I was and where we were before we moved to our current locations, and I have never done it sitting down. So if I'm able to stay in this chair without jumping up and moving around, I would be impressed. But really, our path started at the same location, which is South Johnston High School. We had a very innovative principal, a visionary principal who took over at South Johnston in 2010. And Ms. Jernigan was already a teacher there. Ms. Johnson and I came in with Dr. Eddie Price when he took over at South Johnston. And though we were in different roles, we all ascended into assistant principalships with him at South Johnston and really went through a true school transformation. And it was wrapped around really the one component that if you ask teachers across the board, what are 3 things that you don't have enough of in your role? And almost across the state, anywhere you're going to hear unanimously, 3 things are money, resources, and time. And we know as a principal, we can't do but so much about the money aspect of it. That's out of our hands, really, at the state legislative level and at the county commissioner level. The same thing with resources. We only have what is being delegated to us by the county commissioners or our local LEAs or the state. But as time, as principals, we have a lot of opportunities there where we could seek to alter our daily schedule and change our daily schedule so that we can best meet the needs of students. And so at South Johnston, that's what Dr. Price recognized, and what he implemented is what the three of us are going to talk about, and then really go forward of how we've now applied it to where we are in our different schools and really look at replication. So as Ms. Jernigan clicked on there, where we are with the data, really there was 4 areas that we were looking at South Johnston as key indicator points as to is what we're doing in changing the schedule, our daily schedule, impactful for students. And so you really want to break those down over 3 areas: student accountability measures or student outcomes, high school accountability measures, and then finally teacher working conditions. How do our teachers feel about the building? And so what you would see in these 4 areas, if you took a deep dive into our data, which we're not going to do here, but it is attached as part of an appendix, is that you would see that at South Johnston, teacher working conditions increased dramatically in the level of agreement from 2010 to 2012 to 2014 to numbers that were honestly 10 to 15 percentage points above the state and county averages. Our 4-year graduation rate went from 77 to over 95%. And you're talking about a school that is in the I-95 corridor, a school with about 40% free and reduced lunch, with an EC population near 20% in terms of the student body. Disciplinary trend data, a sharp decline in disciplinary out-of-school suspensions, the reduction in dropouts down to my last year there, we left at South Johnston, we had 7. So you would see, and that's from the mid-40s. So, and then the trend data of, you would think if you have fewer kids dropping out, then your EOC data is not going to necessarily improve because you have more students that are testing. And actually what we saw was that was an increase in the EOC trend data at South Johnston during our time there. So that's really just to set the stage of where we are and where we were at South Johnston when we all left in 2015-16 and how it's continued on. But Ms. Jernigan is going to tell you a little bit about where South Johnston was in 2010.
Right. So I was a teacher in 2010 at South Johnston, and as we've talked about this, I've heard people say, well, you must just had a great school and great teachers in place. And I would just like to say the school was probably run by the students in 2010. Teacher morale was very low. We had low test scores. There was not a focus on instruction and best practices with instruction. There wasn't a focus on curriculum. And part of our reason why, when I was asked, why, how's it working for you, is I didn't have time. I didn't have time in the day to collaborate. I didn't have time in the day to work on my instructional practices in my curriculum. And what Power Block was able to do was to give us the opportunity as a group of teachers to not only meet with my grade level team, but I was able to start meeting with the student advocate with my team or the counselor with my team. So not only could we start focusing on students' academics, but we could start talking about behaviors and intervention plans, academic as well. In addition to, I still had my planning block. I didn't lose my planning block. So I was able to collaborate every day with individuals that I needed that support.
Okay. And so when we talk about Power Block, it sounds very simplistic. Okay, great, turn on the power, here we go. It's definitely not that simple. As we know, most change is complex. It takes time. And it takes a lot of commitment from people who want to see it, really want to see it be different. We should also preface by saying that the folks who were in the building in 2010, 47 of them changed over from 2010 to 2014. So sometimes it really is, there's a lid for every container, and this is not your lid. And that's okay. There's another place for you, but it's not going to be here. And so when we started thinking about the intervention block, getting the time that we needed, we took our students, we took student leaders. And when I say leaders, I don't just mean student government. I mean lots of different cross sections of students who had voice with other students, as well as teachers of the same. And even one time I took a couple of parents to visit other places that had some kind of power of what we were trying to build at South Johnston. And so we had those examples. We took from those what we needed in terms of the the good, the bad, the ugly, and then made our decisions from there. And when you hear me use the word we, because it had to be a we. The first visit, there were 3 of us in September of 2010. And then by the time we got closer to the actual turning on of Power Block later that year in the 4th quarter, there were 35 people who were involved in subcommittee work. And so here, all of these things are embedded in the PowerPoint. Again, we don't want to belabor, but I do want to call your attention, if there are any one of those 4 links that you do get a chance to look at, the subcommittees, the subcommittee objectives, because the way we phrase that was we said, what are the things that we need to think about? This is nuts and bolts, okay? So what are the things that we need to think about in terms of putting something like this together? So some of those things that the staff came up with, accountability. How do we hold students accountable for going where they need to go? How do we hold staff accountable for utilizing this time in a way that is impactful for students and for themselves as professionals? Lunch logistics. Do we let kids carry lunch out of the cafeteria or not? We thought that might be our undoing at one point because there were definite sides to that. But with, as Bennett said, our free and reduced population, which at that time was a bit higher and could even be higher, but a lot of people didn't fill the application out. And so if we don't allow students to take their lunch out of the cafeteria, what are we allowing as far as access? It becomes an equity issue. And so we talked about that. There was lunch logistics, accountability. There was a scheduling subcommittee that really just talked about how do we just put this schedule together? What does it look like? And under each subcommittee, there was a set of essential questions. And those essential questions, again, are listed out like seemingly simple things like when do kids go to lunch? These are, simple things, but again, very, very important for us to think through every bit of the how once we had our minds wrapped around our why.
Representative Meyer, you have been a champion both for teachers throughout the legislation and also through just the educational system itself. And I wanted to ask you, what do you feel from your perspective might be one of the greatest barriers for districts, LEAs, in this time flexibility discussion?
Well, the biggest barrier that we hear about from schools is the barrier to the start of school date. Mm-hmm. But to me, I would love to fix that. I think most people in the House would love to fix that. To me, this question of how do we actually give teachers more time is a more fundamental problem to solve. Because we can move your start date up and you wouldn't necessarily actually have more time together. So I want to tell you a little bit about myself before I tell you about the idea that I want to introduce to you. So I spent 18 years working in public schools before I was in the legislature. My wife is a 24-year veteran teacher, and I do professional development for schools now. And I hate doing drive-by professional development. Like, it sucks. Like, I sat in your chairs in a 45-minute after-school thing with a PowerPoint. Like, it's horrible. So I've spent a lot of years trying to develop ways to give teachers the chance to learn from one another. And the biggest obstacle to that is always figuring out, how do we give you the time to do that? Well, the Hope Street Fellows came to me a couple years ago with a report that they did on teacher perceptions of what would make teaching in North Carolina more rewarding. And what struck me was that in that survey, teachers actually said that having more time to learn from one another was more important to them than having more pay. Now, they also said having more pay was very important. But the fact that they were willing to put collaborative time ahead of pay just really, really hit me. And so we started talking about some ways to do that. And then I was at a convening kind of like this of the Institute of Emerging Issues. We were talking about opportunities. And a businessman at that meeting said, well, the one thing you can never buy is more time. And it hit me. I thought, that's actually not true in education. We have 20% of teachers' time that we could buy. When you're on a 10-month contract, we could actually buy up to 2 more months of your time. Mm-hmm. So then I got in touch with David Cooper, who's sitting over here with Best NC. He helped me look around the country, figured out, is anybody doing creative stuff to extend the school contract for teachers to give them more time to learn from one another? The answer to that is mostly no. Almost no one is doing to this. But we started to look at best practices on professional development for teachers learning from one another. And then Shelby Armstrong at the legislature helped me put together a bill with Representative Horn, who's here. And this is what we proposed, Representative Horn, myself, and Representative Elmore. we proposed that North Carolina could be the first in the nation to offer a set of 4 groups of teachers extended year contracts with the specific purpose of giving teachers more time to learn from one another. Whoop, wrong way. We would give all beginning teachers an 11-month contract rather than a 10-month contract. You know how hard it is to onboard when you're a beginning teacher. You're supposed to be learning all the ropes, plus planning your curriculum. You're supposed to have this mentor. That person never has any time to see you, right? So we also want to make sure that your mentor, master teachers, have an 11th month so that they can spend some time with those beginning teachers. And master teachers have so much more that they could be teaching colleagues. So let's give those master teachers a chance to have time to plan that professional development or lead that professional development, whatever it is. And then veteran teachers, not every year, but maybe every once in a while, would have the opportunity to take an 11-month contract, to take a deep professional development time to extend yourself and not get stagnant in your career. The 4th group that stands out a little bit differently and doesn't quite fit on the slide, obviously, is low-performing schools. We've done almost nothing for the nearly 500 low-performing schools in North Carolina, and that is probably, to me, the biggest crisis in public education in the state. What if we gave all of them, every teacher in all low-performing schools, 11-month contracts so that they could do more and learn more and be better for their students? So here's some ideas of what could come out of that. Those beginning teachers would have the chance to work under a master teacher. They'd have the opportunity to work in summer school alongside a master teacher. So they'd be learning how to work with some of the most difficult students, but with some of the most experienced teachers. Those master teachers then get hands-on mentoring opportunities with the new teachers, as well as the opportunity to provide professional development and coaching to anyone else. It doesn't even have to be within your school. You could have schools of education that would set up statewide networks for online professional development with the best teachers in the state, teaching other teachers how to do what they do during this 11th month. Those veteran teachers, so I asked my wife, I said, how often would you want to have this type of opportunity? And she said, definitely not every year, because she likes her summers off. But she said she would like to have that opportunity like maybe every 3 to 5 years. I said, what would you want to use it for? Well, she said, well, sure, some PD or time would be good. I'd like to learn from other teachers. She said, but really, every few years, we kind of need to go through our curriculum and make sure everything's up to date, and we never have time to do that except for after school, right? So could we have time to plan with each other? So the idea is that this probably has to be either time where you're learning from other teachers, or maybe you'd come here to SAS for a month, and you'd shadow in a department here that's related to what you teach in your high school, and then you'd be able to take a career-embedded experience that you had a month of here and bring it back and add to your teaching. And then those low-performing schools, we could extend the school year. That would actually allow them, because the teachers are paid for, they could actually extend the school year for their kids if we gave them calendar flexibility. Those kids need more learning time so that they're not so low-performing. And the teachers could still get more time for professional development. Plus, it becomes the biggest recruitment incentive we have for teachers to go into our most difficult schools, because giving you an 11th month is 10% more pay. And so if you agree to go into that low-performing school, you're automatically going to get that 10% pay increase. It's not a raise, right, because you're actually doing work for the month, but it is a pay increase if you're in any of those 4 categories. We had the budget numbers worked up. This is not a cheap proposal. It's a bold proposal. It would cover about 40% of teachers in the state. All of them would get a 10% increase in pay. It would cost about the equivalent of giving all teachers in the state about a 4.5% increase in pay, which is about $250 million. So basically the same amount as last year's pay raise, but it would go to a targeted group of teachers who would get a 10% raise instead of a smaller raise. Not to say we should not give all teachers raises, but just another way to reward teachers and professionalize you and give you the chance to have more time with one another.
Yeah.
I'm glad you like it.
What I love about that, and what we can see on the slide here, is how interconnected this is to one of our morning sessions that we had about advanced teacher roles, especially looking at this master teacher slide that you've got, about giving teachers that opportunity to co-teach and to mentor somebody that they may not otherwise have an opportunity to. And even with the veteran teachers, giving them that opportunity every 3 to 5 years to still do that. That still gives them that advanced teaching role opportunity that they otherwise might not be able to have there. One of the other questions that we have written down here is, and this is actually going to go to all of you, so you can kind of popcorn this if you want to, but What other strategies have you considered in promoting meaningful collaboration among your educators?
So taking, we had to go over very briefly what Power Block was, but really at Power Block was that intervention block during the day where students got to choose where they wanted to go during lunchtime to get enhancements, remediation, teachers could collaborate. I took that when I went to Clayton High School, and what we have implemented at Clayton High School is not only we call it Comet Time because we want to be different, but what we have turned it into is a flex learning opportunity. And so this Friday is actually our first one, but we have identified 6 days in the calendar. Our board has approved for us to have flex learning days at our school where our students do not come to school. We instead will be engaged in professional development as a staff. Our students will be working on assessments, both internet-based or non-internet-based, depending upon their preference and their accessibility. But our teachers have prepared different assessment opportunities there. The way I equated it to parents was quite simply this: how many days do we lose in a regular calendar year for testing? And I'm not just talking about standardized testing. I'm talking about classroom testing, which always and forever has looked like go into a classroom, sit for about 5 minutes. All right, guys, clear off your desk, get your paper and pencil out, number 1 to 20 or whatever it is you're going to do. And then I do it. And the teacher sits behind the desk and the students work. And when you finish, maybe lay your head down or maybe read a book or something. Just be quiet. Don't bother anybody else that's working. That was a day of learning lost because the teacher was using that time to assess students. So what we said was, can we find different ways to assess students and find out what they know on this flex learning day so that they don't have to come sit in front of you to show you? Can they create an artistic expression or some type of creative writing or some type of group project or some type of flip grid assignment to where they're telling you and talking to you and upload it? And at the same time, instead of that teacher sitting behind the desk for 3 periods, they're engaged in meaningful professional development in our school. And so we're very excited about implementing that. This Friday is our first one. And so it's targeted so that we're able to focus on things like learning profile and personalized learning opportunities for students. So it's just a way that as a principal, we can't find necessarily more time, but we can create time if we think outside the box or get rid of the box altogether about ways that we can implement professional developments.
I like what Doug shared about his school with the professional development. So what I'd like to do is elaborate on that, and it does play into a bit of what Bennett said, and Dana and I have a similar calendar with our 2 feeder patterns that we're in, but it's organized by a feeder pattern. And so the idea is that we do have, rather than half days, we do have full days of professional development. So the idea is that when teachers come in on that day, it is completely for learning. So we don't come in and have students and have to get students off campus and it flies by really quickly, and by the time they leave, we're exhausted. And so for us in our 2 feeder patterns, this is something that we are doing for the first time this year, and wanted to reiterate too that I really like the ideas, like for us, like Bennett said, Power Block, it's integrated into the day or Comet Time. And then I like the idea of the outside of school time as well, because time is time. And so the more we can utilize it and compensate people for their time, the better off we will be.
I want to just add to that really briefly. We keep hearing the word, we want to be able to collaborate. And the interesting thing about doing this as a feeder pattern is during some of those days, we have 9 days for professional development, we're able to meet as a feeder pattern. So we're able to do vertical planning. So it's not just stop at middle school. We're able to meet with our high school teachers. And it gives us time to do planning with our other middle schools. So we're able to look at the students' progression, K-12, even though we're a larger group. So
I'm going to give you an idea that isn't related to my bill, and I'm going to take off my legislator hat, put on my school equity coach hat. This is something I encourage principals to do. Principals will often say, oh, I just wish that she could see what this other teacher does because she could really get better if she sees this other teacher's classroom. And I say, great, why don't you volunteer to teach her class 1 day a week for 4 weeks so that she can go watch the other teacher? And then the principal says, oh, that's an interesting idea. I'll just get a sub. And I say, no, don't get a sub.
You go teach it.
You go teach her class, because if she knows that you're in her class for that period, she is going to value that time in the other class and what she learns in it a lot more than if you just pay for a sub. You're dedicating yourself to helping her to get better. Plus, you need to be in a classroom every once in a while, principals. So if you're a teacher and you think that would help, you take that to your principal, tell them Representative Meyer said so.
I think I'm going to take that back with me into my school.
Easy
Very
now,
humbling.
easy.
Very, very.
Easy.
Yes, very
112
humbling.
teachers.
I think, so one of the things that we did talk backstage about, and I do want to kind of shift just a little bit of this conversation trajectory, is that discussion of equity. And what can this do for student equity and access when we talk about allowing schools or moving schools in this direction that they can do this. So, and I'm going to start going down at the end, and then we're going to work our way back this way. I want you guys to kind of start off. How do you envision that this could impact or affect school equity and access?
Well, going back to the extended year contracts idea, that I think the biggest impact on equity is the possibility to actually do something meaningful for our low-performing schools. But across all the ideas that we have, the ability to boost teacher performance through shared learning, especially with beginning teachers in those early stage years, is going to have the strongest impact on the kids who need it the most, right? There's nothing we can do more for kids who need access and opportunity than to improve teacher quality. So here's a way to put our money where our mouth is and give teachers the time to improve.
Yeah, I go back. Benson Middle is actually the middle school that feeds into South Johnston High School, and so we have more bus riders than we do car riders. And so when you get to the high school, if you need kids need extra help, more support, they're not able to stay after school. They rely on that bus for transportation. So the power block gave us the time to provide interventions specific to that student and that need during the school day. They didn't have to wait, and they were able to get their lunch out of the cafeteria and bring it with them. So they were also able, to eat. And I think that was one of the biggest things that it allowed us to do.
And to build on that point of students needing to ride the bus, we also have teachers who have other obligations after school, whether it's coaching. And so some of our coaches are our most powerful relationship builders. So Power Block allows us to leverage those coaches so that they can meet with their football players and go check on them and make sure they're going to a biology tutorial if that's what they're struggling with. And so it also helps with our adults, so that everyone owns what has to happen with kids as well.
I'll just stop with saying relationships.
Yep.
You want to find equity, treat everyone with that respect. Mm-hmm. Invest. I tell our staff, those that are the hardest to love are the ones we're going to love the most. And so finding that time in the school day to where teachers can share ideas and counselors share information, mm-hmm. It allows you to build that relationship and be able to bring that student in and have a much more in-depth conversation than the math homework that was missing. Mm-hmm. You start diving into what problems are at home, and it starts to understand. You find that relationship, and really, I think you want to go back and look at the data and say, well, why did the 4-year graduation cohort increase? Why did dropouts decrease? Relationships. Mm-hmm. They are actually students. The barrier was reduced because of the time and teachers had time, so that school became a place that students wanted to be instead of places they had to be. Mm-hmm. And when you give students the opportunity to choose and they know that somebody's there that cares about them and is checking on them to see that they're every day, then it's amazing what kids are just kids. And so at the end of the day, they just want to be loved and know somebody cares mm-hmm. about them, and it's amazing what they'll do for you. And so find ways to find that time so that they can find those relationships and strengthen those relationships.
So I'm going to also answer my own question. I'm going to piggyback off this because this is actually where I was thinking about with this. One of the greatest benefits that I find that our teachers have at our school when we have these early release Mondays is that we get an opportunity, as we've mentioned, in being able to collaborate frequently with teachers that otherwise on a regular school day I would not have an opportunity to be able to go to, because 7th grade does not have the same elective and planning time that 6th grade does, because they don't have them all at the same time. And one of the benefits that has come out of that often comes along when we're talking about relationships with students. One of my 7th grade teachers this year has had a student that has been extremely difficult for them to connect with, just because between the two of them it's not jiving. And that 7th grade teacher came down on a Monday and sat down with our entire 6th grade team and said, "You all taught this kid last year for the 100 and something days that we were here. I need to hear some strategies from you. What worked with this student, because he still talks about you as a 6th grade team as if he still wants to be back in 6th grade. What can we do?" And so she was just getting into our mindsets and asking us what we did. And we were able to say, hey, it wasn't really so much the interventions so much as it was the relationship that we built. Forget the homework, forget the classwork, and sit down with this kid and let this kid know that he is valued and that he is cared for here, and then you'll be able to take care of that other stuff. And so I can't express enough just what this does for student impact and success. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our opportunity and our time to go ahead and turn it back over to you guys, that you guys may ask some questions. So we will do audience questions. Ooh, right back here.
Thank you. It seems to me that anybody that's here is interested in trying to improve the situation in their schools, the outcomes, improve their whole job, their career. They also wouldn't be here if the school systems had not approved giving you the time to be here. So obviously they are interested in trying to improve. Also, thinking about all of the things that have been said so far today, one of the key things that seems to be a recurring comment is, I want respect as a teacher, and planning and collaboration is a key way to develop that. We listened to the panel and other people today, and it's clear that that can be done. There's not a tremendous amount of actual cost to it. So my question is that when you ask the group how many people feel like they have enough time to plan and collaborate, no one raised their hand. Where's the disconnect? What needs to be done to try to get that started, in the schools?
I'll let you three take that for starters.
Go ahead.
So as we know, we are mandated to provide 1,025 hours of instructional time to our students in the school year. So that said, nowhere in there does it say that teachers have to have this much time to plan necessarily. So we have to figure out, it's not just about planning, it's about collaborating. And it also forces us to think about, what does instructional time look like? So is it just as powerful to have a tutorial for biology, as I mentioned before, to have the basketball team not meet with that coach, but form that relationship with that coach? Is there teaching that happens there? So it allows us to think differently about what instruction actually looks like, or what is the entry point for the teaching, which is the relationship, and that allows us to do that. And so it's just a rethinking, because the time is the same, the amount, but what happens in that time is what we chose to look at differently in our setting.
And I'll just add, and I don't go on a diatribe because I can do it. I think some of it, it's hard to be innovative with traditional policies. Mm-hmm. And I think some policies get in the way of the innovation, especially at the local level. There are school districts with local policies and local things that are enacted that keep some principles. We are very fortunate that we have a very proactive and visionary superintendent who allows us to be here, who also allows us to try new things and encourages us to try new things as risk takers. But I think there is a generalization across the board that there are certain policies that dictate, therefore, how we have to run our schools and what the education has to look like within those schools. And a lot of it's through a fear of standardized testing and some of the accountability measures that are there, as well as, what is the incentive for teachers to continue to improve? One of the things I've tried to challenge outside of an internal desire to do things, are there external factors that could be motivational opportunities for students, for teachers to continue to improve, whether it's an extended year contract, whether it's credentialing and paying for credentialing, or being a master teacher, or earning other types of professions or professional distinctions as you move along in the profession. So I think there's a couple of different ways that we could attack that barrier that it is that a lot of teachers run into. And just quite frankly, education's been done the same way for hundreds of years. And it's difficult to change. Some parents are some of the leading antagonists to change.
And if I can just kind of add to that, like when I talk about my school and the way that we do Mondays, every Monday has a specific requirement of what the teachers are expected to do for professional development. The first Monday of every month, there's either a consultant or somebody from DPI or somewhere from central office that's coming in, and we're doing all K-12 staff. You're doing this professional development, so you're all getting the same thing. Second Monday every month is what we do with lateral. So all the English teachers get together the second Monday of every month. All the science teachers, you're getting together. All the social studies teachers and all the other teachers on that same thing, which in a more traditional setting, you wouldn't get that because, like I mentioned earlier, 7th grade and 6th grade and 8th grade at a middle school do not have the same planning times across the board because their students are not out of their classrooms to allow that opportunity. And so this is just kind of rethinking and reshaping the way that you use that time as well. Okay, another question? Yes, ma'am, in the back.
So I had a question about the extended year contracts for the low-performing schools. You know, sometimes what we see in low-performing schools isn't only just about the time that students are in the classroom. Sometimes it really deals with resources, so outdated textbooks, outdated technology, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to just get a little bit more understanding around, is there thoughts around the funding that would go to helping with resources and not just extending the time, but actually providing the resources that will be helpful for the students in those schools as well?
That's a wonderful question. I mean, the extended year contract proposal doesn't address that, but it's also not a magic bullet, right? So your question really opens up the hood to say, like, what have we done for those schools? And we haven't done even what you've suggested of making sure that they have some of the basic access to technology and materials that other higher performing and probably wealthier schools already have access to. So there's a lot of things we could do for those schools.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. Allison.
I feel very special that you use my name when addressing me, Mr. Price. I just kind of wanted to speak to the point about why there were probably a lot of people who didn't raise their hands when asked about planning and collaboration time. So often that planning and collaboration time, because it's not protected, gets taken by other things. So like when it's time for testing, my planning time is taken because I have to learn how to read from a book and like read all the highlighted parts so that I can administer the test properly, right? Or like, you might have to deal with student discipline. You might have to have parent-teacher conferences during that time because that's the only time you and your co-teacher are there at the same time. So I feel like due to the fact that that planning time and collaboration time isn't, it is so sacred, like, but because it's not protected in like a more formal fashion, that you oftentimes lose that, so.
And could I speak to that briefly with just a little bit more about the logistics of power? Our teachers had 1 day a week when they were on duty during half of power block. And then they had, or it was 2 days a week, 2 days a week. So out of 10 blocks, so it was, you know, half of it A and then B, and then AB was all week. So 10 blocks total. 2 of those blocks, they were on duty. Otherwise, they had tutorials where they had students in. Otherwise, it was their time. And Dr. Price, who Bennett mentioned, Bennett, myself, Mr. Avery, who was with us, Dana, we were the ones running the big common areas during power. Dr. Price used to wear an apron that the cafeteria ladies had made for him because he was in there bussing tables behind people. But that sends a really strong message. And so we were out there doing the work. We didn't go in our offices and close our doors because it was that important for the students and the teachers to do what they needed to do to impact their success.
And when you have that extra time, we ask teachers to start doing walkthroughs during their planning block. But they had that other time during the day. So even if I ask you to go look and see what another teacher's doing that you typically wouldn't get to go see, and learn from that and reflect on that and provide feedback from that, you still have that protected time later on in the day to get what you need done as well.
So unfortunately, I got my wrap-up sign. That was right there. So I just want us to take an opportunity to thank these 4 guests for being here today. And certainly feel free to grab any of us if you have any further questions. So thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you very much.